Good afternoon and welcome to the live Q&A for the Film Screening Rewind. My name is Linda Cleary and I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Children's Alliance. Our organization is a nonprofit membership organization that represents all the child advocacy centers in New York State. As the state chapter for these centers, we provide resources, training, and individualized technical assistance to support the tremendous work of these child advocacy centers. Many of the multidisciplinary team members from these child advocacy centers have joined us today for this film screening and Q&A. We're pleased that we could offer this film screening to you, and we're honored and privileged to have the opportunity to have this Q&A session with Sasha Joseph Neulinger. I was fortunate to meet Sasha back in 2017, when as the director of a child advocacy center, we booked him as our keynote speaker for our conference. I heard his powerful message again at the National Children's Alliance Leadership Conference in 2018. He is, without a doubt, one of the most compassionate and genuine individuals I have ever met. Sasha is a hockey player, backcountry adventurer, husband, speaker, and filmmaker. And he also happens to be a survivor of multi-generational child sexual abuse. It's my pleasure to introduce Sasha Joseph Neulinger.
Thank you so much for having me, Linda.
Thank you, Sasha, so much for doing this. I do want to just mention to everybody, please feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll try to get as many of them as we can during about 45 minutes that we have live with Sasha. Sasha, I know there are probably a million questions that people have, but we're going to start out asking you a couple that we've kind of jotted down from the chapter as to what we kind of would like to know from you. You certainly are aware that there are hundreds of children, unfortunately, that have been abused by a loved one. Can you just share why you decided to do this film, why you decided to move forward with something that I'm sure was very hard to go through? What was your goal when you did it? What were you hoping to accomplish?
So, yeah, that's a great question, and it's kind of a two-part answer. A year after the last trial ended in my saga, I moved to Montana to study film production at Montana State University. And the years that I had in Montana, those were the first 4 or 5 consecutive years of my life where abuse wasn't the primary focus of my existence. And in many ways, I was getting to have a taste of what it meant to move forward with my life post-trauma. You know, I was climbing mountains and fly fishing and enjoying nature. Was doing well in school, but at the same time, there was still a symptom that remained. There was this lingering, self-deprecating voice that sometimes would come seemingly out of nowhere. And in my mind, I'd hear that voice and it would say, you know, if people knew what happened to you, they wouldn't want to hang out with you. You're not lovable. And as I continued to push forward with my life in healthy ways, that voice became more and more of a nuisance to me because it wasn't ringing true to the experience I was having in my life. But I had a decision to make. It was either I live my whole life with that voice popping up whenever it wants to, interrupting my joy, or I could pump the brakes and look back and figure out where that voice was coming from and address it, because that's unresolved trauma that I needed to look at. And so I figured I should start by watching home video. Maybe there'd be some answers in there. And so I called my dad and I asked if he had home videos still, because he always had the camera around. And he said that he had close to or over 200 hours of home video. And he sent the tapes. And after I watched the first 6 tapes, I realized that for each question I was answering, I had 10 new questions that I wanted to ask, questions that I wanted to ask my mom, my dad, the prosecutor, the detective. And so what I was feeling in that moment as I was watching these first 6 tapes was, okay, I'm going to embark on this journey to figure out what trauma still remains, to look at it head on and confront it so that I give myself every opportunity to truly be able to move forward from this. And part of being able to make that decision was a result of having so much mental health support as a kid. I realized that if I was going to embark on this journey, it could be a great opportunity for my own personal catharsis, but if I documented it and found a way to share this experience, it could be an incredible resource for the 1 in 10 children, all these children out there, and the adults who are trying to support those children in understanding this trauma and ultimately creating an opportunity for people to see that we can't change the past. We can't really control what others do around us, but we can choose how we show up in the present moment of our lives. And ultimately, while it's a travesty and one of the greatest social epidemics of our time, if we are willing to have open conversations with ourselves and with those around us, we can collectively move through this and help survivors move forward.
Sasha, you've mentioned now, about going to your mother and to your father to kind of relive an awful lot of this. So certainly they had to kind of walk some of this journey with you and to try to relive all of this. Can you just share a little bit about their experience as they kind of relived this whole journey with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate that my family trusted me to do this and trusted themselves to participate in a way that was open and vulnerable and honest. My dad was supportive right out of the gate, which is incredibly brave. My mom was too. You know, the biggest challenge I had in making this film was providing and allowing for space for both my mom and my dad to express their authentic experience, even if what they were saying or expressing was subjectively challenging as the son of both of them. So, allowing space for my mom to feel her anger and her frustration, but also allowing space for my dad to express where the challenges were and where things were stuck in his psyche because of the trauma he experienced. And what I would say is through having these open conversations, the relationship that I have with each of my parents and the relationship I believe they each now have with themselves as individuals is stronger and more self-aware and is giving them every opportunity to live a more wholesome and productive life. And so these conversations were hard, but they were absolutely worth it.
Mm-hmm. When you first started with this whole process from the legal standpoint, I think from a child advocacy center, we would like to know that, as soon as a child discloses that the system works very quickly, and we know that it certainly does not. And so you spent quite a few years in trying to get really to the end result of everything. So instead of testifying against your Uncle Howard, you ultimately decided to do the plea deal. Can you share what led you to that decision?
Absolutely. And there's a couple points I want to touch on there. So yeah, it took 9 years from the time I disclosed till the last moment in court where I got to read my victim impact statement to Howard. 9 years. And the reality is that, for the first two cases, my Uncle Larry and my cousin Stuart, they didn't have millions of dollars in their defense funds. And so the proceedings could just happen. We were able to prosecute those cases. With Howard, there was a lot of money poured into his defense fund. And so they were able to file a lot of motions to delay the proceedings. And months became years. And, I was trying to move forward with my life. I was in high school at this point. And finally, when they were out of motions to file, they came and asked for a plea bargain. And For so long, it was the thought of Howard behind bars that kept me pushing forward. But after 9 years of prosecution on top of 4 years of actual abuse, and now I was 16 going on 17, looking forward to college, I was ready to move on with my life. And one of the threats coming from the defense was, look, we'll go to court, and if you get a conviction, we'll appeal it, and we'll just drag this thing out all the way into Sasha's adult life. And I just felt that for me to move on, truly move on with my life, my happiness and my ability to do that had to be dependent on what I could control and not dependent on things that I couldn't. So I can't control how much money Howard had to defend himself. I can't control, what the jury thinks or says if we go to court. But I can choose to recognize that just by speaking up about what happened, by confronting it, by owning my voice and not allowing the stigma and the shame to be perpetuated by silence. Like Dr. Lustig said, I had already won. And, if we had gone through a full trial and we got our conviction on the felony charges, maybe I wouldn't have made this film. And when I look back, being able to make this film was a result of owning my voice and recognizing my own power as a human being and as a survivor. And that headspace and that emotional space started when I chose to move forward with my life, independent of this, what seemed like a really convoluted system.
Sasha, you mentioned when you had done your victim impact statement, and I know that in a child advocacy center, typically the victim advocates try to work with the child to do that. Can you just tell how that went for you? I mean, was that a good process for you to be able to write a victim impact statement? Was that, I guess, therapeutic for you to be able to do that?
Absolutely. I mean, and whether or not a victim shares that with their abuser or not is, in my opinion, irrelevant. It's the act of speaking your truth and putting it down on paper, and again, owning your voice and recognizing your validity and beauty as a human being, and that despite what happened, you still have that. You still have your voice. You still have your individuality. But for me personally, to be able to stare Howard down in the courtroom until he looked away, mm-hmm. and to call him a coward to his face, the man that for so many years of my life took up the most space in my mind in terms of fear, that was incredibly empowering. And, I think that part of expressing trauma and trying to work through it, whether it's through painting, whether it's through writing, whatever art form, whether it's just in therapy, getting it out of your body and seeing it on paper or hearing it, taking that subjective frustration or pain and putting it outside of your body and seeing it objectively, I think is a really therapeutic process.
We have a question that's come in that says, first, thank you so much for sharing your story. Your strength and bravery is so inspiring. As a therapist at a child advocacy center, I often see and hear very similar thoughts and feelings from children who have been sexually abused. What would you like children to know, words of advice or inspiration, who are currently struggling and coping and working through their trauma?
That's a great question. Every child has their own unique experience and their own unique response to the trauma they've experienced. But what was really helpful for me in my healing process was to get to a point where I could recognize and accept that no matter what I do, what happened to me happened to me. That can't be changed. There's something about accepting that and surrendering to that gave me space and emotional energy to then move forward. It's like, okay, I can't change the fact that this happened. It did. It wasn't my fault. I had nothing to do with what happened to me, but I had everything to do with moving forward with my life. and perspective, right? It's like, yes, this happened to you and it can't be undone, but that was yesterday. And what you do have ownership of as a survivor, what you do get to do is choose what you want to do today. What makes you happy today? What is something that you want in your life? Who do you want to be as a person? Because whatever that abuser did to you, they did it to you on that day in that past, but they're not with you now. And by choosing to move forward today, whether it's I'm going to draw a picture of my cat because I love my cat, or I'm going to play an extra 10 minutes of soccer during recess because that makes me happy. Reminding victims of abuse that they still do have ownership of their own choices. And that's something that can't be taken from them. I think that's so important.
Obviously, that question came from someone working in a child advocacy center, and we know that a lot of folks that registered for this film screening actually are multidisciplinary team members in child advocacy centers. And so I'm assuming there are an awful lot on this Q&A right now that are professionals in those CACs. So what message would you like to send to the folks who are in this line of work, the people that are actually working in the child advocacy center and trying to help these children day in and day out? What message would you have for them?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank each and every one of you for bringing your energy and your time and your passion and committing it to helping the children in your communities. I didn't have a child advocacy center when I was a kid going through all of this, and I know with all the work I've been doing with child advocacy centers, how much that would have helped me. And you need to understand that each and every one of you, you're superheroes. You are making the difference that will enable us to have a brighter, more beautiful future. And with that power also comes great responsibility. Responsibility to make sure that you're taking care of yourselves. I've seen it as I've traveled the country and meeting with the multidisciplinary teams all over the United States. One of the biggest issues is sometimes we can be so passionate about the work that our needs come second. And it's so important that if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling like you don't have enough time to do the things that matter to you, that you step back and make yourself a priority, because even though each case is intense, this is a long game. And to be able to give our best energy and do our best work, we've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of ourselves so that we can be the best well-oiled machines that we can be. And so just remember that, you deserve that. You deserve to have a beautiful, happy, balanced life. And if you feel like maybe things are out of balance, take some time to look at it, because you're incredible human beings and you deserve that.
Great, thank you. In the film, you share quite a few clips of you looking at the pictures that you drew as a child. What was that like for you as an adult to now go back and look at the pictures that you had drawn as a child?
Yeah, when I was seeing those drawings for the first time in decades, it was a very complex experience for me, because I was instantly brought back to the subjective emotions and feelings that I had when I was a kid. I was remembering that. And yet, because I was an adult, years removed from that trauma, looking at it, I had a certain level of compassion for myself, empathy for myself, seeing that pain and being able to objectively realize that that was a lot of pain for a little child to have, and yet also acknowledging the courage I had to go there mentally and emotionally and express it. So it was shocking to see these images because I think I'd put them to rest in my mind. They weren't fresh in my mind when I was looking at them now in the process of making this film, but they provided an opportunity for me to acknowledge my courage and honor that little boy. And I think that's the biggest piece here. You know, my big keynote that I've traveled with, my keynote speech, Rediscovering the Beauty Within, the process of rewatching my childhood and seeing it more objectively and understanding the greater contexts of how this could have happened, why it happened, why things took so long, by talking to everyone who was involved in my case, being able to recognize that, again, what happened to me had nothing to do with me, but where I am today had everything to do with the choices I made throughout the journey. And when children are abused, I mean, all of you know this, they believe that they've been abused because they have done something to deserve it, because they are dirty, disgusting, unlovable, because they can't comprehend how a trusted adult would choose to inflict that kind of pain on them. So it must be a punishment. And kids that don't get the support that they need, access to mental health professionals and justice, a lot of times they can grow up believing that narrative, that what happened to them was their fault, or what happened to them was because they're dirty, disgusting, and unlovable. And imagine walking through life feeling that way. That was part of that voice that was in my head post-college that I still had to deal with, even after so much therapy. It's a journey, and I would say that healing is not a destination, it's a journey. I feel like every time I come to peace with something else inside of myself, I've created more space, mental energy and space to recognize something else that could use some attention. And I think, you know, when we think of emotions, I think fear gets judged the most. It's like, oh, like even Nike, right? They say, no fear. That's not accurate. Like fear is actually part of our biological experience as humans. Like fear is actually a useful emotion and response to danger. And I think that instead of saying, oh, don't have fear, push through, recognize when we do feel fear, because in that there's an opportunity for intimacy with ourselves and understanding ourselves. And I think that we can absolutely move forward and even effectively overcome huge obstacles while also experiencing fear. I don't think they have to be independent of each other. I think that people who are in touch with those uncomfortable emotions and feelings have an opportunity to learn more about themselves, grow closer to themselves, and ultimately become more self-empowered.
Sasha, we have another question for you that says, Sasha, you are such an inspiration to others that have gone through childhood trauma. Was there anything you wish someone had asked you as a child that might have helped you discuss the abuse you were experiencing?
I don't think any passive questions would have changed how I disclosed. The biggest obstacle for disclosure was fear of not being safe. So what could have been stated to me that might have helped me come forward sooner could have been something along the lines of this. If I'm speaking to a child, I've noticed a change in your behavior. You seem sad and upset, and I'm not sure why you feel that way, but I want you to know that you won't be hurt if you tell me. In fact, I want to know because I can protect you. I want to protect you. I want to help you come away from what has been dangerous, come away from what has been hurtful. I want you to know that no matter what you tell me, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to love you any less. In fact, if something's wrong and you need help, I'm going to help you and make sure that you aren't hurt again. And I recognize that maybe in a forensic interview setting, you can't do that, neutral, non-leading. But for parents, for therapists, maybe there are ways to use that messaging in a way that still is in line with what's needed for appropriate disclosure experiences. But it's about helping the child recognize that it's basically diffusing whatever threat the abuser made to the child. I'll kill you if you tell anybody. Your parents will love you less if you tell them. You'll be in deep trouble. I think what perpetuates the silence and oftentimes keeps children from disclosing is this belief that disclosure, the consequences of disclosure will be worse than the pain of the abuse itself. And we have to work to diffuse that.
Sasha, when you started on this film journey, especially there's quite a few things in the film where you conversations with your parents, separately, where you're finding out things that you didn't know about. The one that is such an image in my head from the film is when your mother is taking you to the tree that you went to. But there's a lot of different places in the film that you share those types of things. How hard was that for you to, a child often relives what happened to them, the actual abuse to them, but not necessarily all the outside things that took place. Even your mom, having the pediatrician saying, don't open that, can of worms type of thing. How hard was that for you to kind of hear all of that stuff as you were making this film?
It wasn't necessarily hard as much as it was illuminating. Shocking sometimes, like when my mom told me about the pediatrician, like, you don't want to open that door. And it's like shocking, illuminating, and also in some ways for me inspiring, because it's like, oh wow, okay, that's where we're coming from. That has to change. What can I do to be a part of that change? Hearing where things were broken, hearing about where adults were failing to show up in a way that was supportive of children, and in this case, me, it gave me maybe a greater understanding of where we could go from there. When my dad was disclosing his abuse, and that was really hard emotionally. My process in making the film and my directorial process was very, very similar to that of a therapist. If I'm getting surface level information and I sense that there's more, I'm going to poke and prod until we get there. Because the point of this isn't to be comfortable. The point of this is to be open and honest and touch the things that really hurt. And the analogy I like to use is, if you have a big gaping wound, pouring hydrogen peroxide on it, if it's infected, like, that's going to sting. It's going to hurt. It may even make you want to pass out because it's so painful. But we need to acknowledge that wound. We need to put medicine on it, and we need to take care of it until it heals. I think that there's another way of responding to trauma, which I think can be detrimental, which is, say someone gets a huge splinter in their hand. Ouch, this hurts. It's scary that there's this big wound. It's scary that there's this foreign body inside of me. I'm just going to put my hand behind my back and it's not there anymore. Well, you can get so used to living your life with only the use of one hand. It doesn't mean that that wound isn't still there. In fact, it's festering, it's pussy, and the physical response to that wound will actually become so much worse because we're not dealing with it. I think that, my takeaway from this is that if there's something from your past that you can't touch without excruciating pain, then you need to start touching it and looking at it and dealing with it, because you're living with shrapnel in your body, in your psyche, and it's not going to go away on its own. It requires the subjective active choice of, I'm going to confront this pain and work with it until it's healed. And it took 7 years to make Rewind. And when I chose to make the film, I recognized that I was entering into this unknown tunnel. And halfway through making the film, I no longer can see the light from the entrance, and I'm still too far away to see the light at the exit. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of concern. And what I had to keep coming back to was I needed to keep reminding myself that I chose this journey. I chose to go into this darkness and enter this cave because I wanted to come out on the other side. And if I can't see light in either direction, I might as well just keep moving forward, because if I do that, eventually I'll get there. And I have to have trust in myself and faith in myself that even with this fear, even with these unknowns, even with this pain, I'm going to make the active choice to put one foot in front of the other. And I got to tell you, sitting here today, 7 years later from the choice to make the film, I live in a beautiful spot with my wife, who's an incredible partner. We adopted a rescue puppy, Rocky, and he's an amazing dog. I love myself, and I see my strength and my beauty, and I'm not afraid to express that. In fact, I'm owning it, and it's positively impacting literally everything that I'm doing in my life, from work to my personal experience with the people that I love. And I've gotten to a place where I'm able to allow that level of intimacy, to allow relationships that are nurturing and loving and supportive and supportive of growth, and being really discerning about the life I want to live, recognizing again that I can't change the past. I can't change the fact that I was sexually abused as a child, but I can look at all of the choices I've made from that time to now and recognize my strength, recognize my beauty, and use that to influence the choices I continue to make as I move forward in my life. And I want to share that message with the world, which is what I started with Rewind, and it's what I'm continuing to do. I'm so passionate about it because I know what it feels like to be at rock bottom. I know what it feels like to have no hope. But if I can survive sexual abuse from 3 different family members at such a young age, and not just survive, but be living what I consider to be my best life, then that opportunity exists for every other child who is going through this. And we have to do everything that we can to ensure that they have that opportunity.
Sasha, you have mentioned here now that it was a 7-year journey to do this film. Do you feel there was any toll that took on your life during that time period as you tried to really get from the start of saying, I'm going to do this film, to all of a sudden, hey, it's out, it's here for everybody to watch? I mean, what toll did that have on you?
I mean, it was, it totally kicked my ass, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I was 23 when I started. I'm 31 now. It was the hardest. It was harder than what I had to go through to actually prosecute my abusers, because this was my journey. I wasn't a kid with a bunch of adults guiding and holding my hand. This was me as an adult saying, I trust myself to be a steward and caretaker of my own experience in my adult life. Even though I wasn't quite there yet, I had to put that out into the universe and say, I'm going for this, without, up until that point, any proof that I could. And so I learned a lot. I learned a lot about personal boundaries. I learned a lot about relationships. I learned a lot about business. I learned a lot about my triggers. I learned a lot about some of the responses that I have to certain things, and asking the question, is that something I want to continue to do, or is it something I want to evolve from? The self-awareness and personal growth, which has led to now this opportunity to be living the life that I'm living, was a direct result of the choice to go back and confront these pieces that were unresolved. I lost hours and hours of sleep. There was a time when I had gained a lot of weight. I've since lost it back. I had many tears. If I collected them, it would be buckets and buckets. But all of the pain, all the sleepless nights, all of those challenges, it was 100% worth it. Because like I said, again, I'm living what I consider to be my best life. And I wouldn't have had this opportunity if I hadn't made the solo choice to embark on this. I wouldn't recommend that every survivor go make a documentary about their experience, but there's something to take from it. And that is, again, if there are pieces from your past that hurt so much that if you touch them, you shut down, that's just an indication that you have to keep touching them, keep looking at them, and stick with it. Because we can only do as much in our own lives as we give ourselves the opportunity to do. If we have these unresolved wounds, if we have these pieces of shrapnel that we're not dealing with, it doesn't mean that we can't live our lives. It just means that there are limitations because there are pieces that aren't working, or that are working in a way that maybe don't serve us anymore. When I started the film, I was excited for the cathartic opportunity, but I was also excited to have a potential to break out as a filmmaker. And when I was younger, I was really, really, really excited about that. I'm grateful that Rewind has been received so well by critics, by audiences, and the accolades that we've received are great. But truly, the biggest reward for me is that I'm living this life. People enjoying the film or recognizing it for its cinematic properties or advocacy properties, that's just the icing on the cake. And so I'm happy to have both. But what the big takeaway is that I'm living my best life.
So I know a lot of people are wondering this as to how your sister Becca is doing. And someone from the audience also wondered if your sister had gone to the same therapist as you did.
Yeah, my sister Becca is doing great. She graduated with her master's in social work, and she is still trying to figure out exactly what she wants to do with that. Each human being has their own unique journey, right? So Becca did have sessions with Dr. Leslie, not as many as I did. She has a different therapist that she sees. I think that, what I've learned also through this journey is that the rate at which the way people address their trauma is their own unique experience. Their response to the trauma is their own unique experience. And I think my sister is having her own unique journey, and I'm really proud of her. I think that she continues to confront the pieces that she wants to look at. And I think that she's doing a great job of honoring herself in that process. And, what I can't speak to her subjective experience, but what I can say is that our relationship is so much better today. What we keep talking about as siblings is, look, yeah, we survived a lot together, and yeah, we helped each other a lot as kids, but that's not what we want to base the foundation of our relationship on. That's something we can recognize for ourselves, but it's time now to create new memories. It's time to let love be the guiding force in how we shape our relationship instead of fear, instead of trauma. And it's taken an adjustment period for both of us, but I'm really grateful.
So I know you are a huge supporter of child advocacy centers. Can you just share if you had had a child advocacy center at the time, how you feel that would have impacted your experience or even the investigative process, how things might have been different for you?
Absolutely. Well, I think if we had had a child advocacy center, it wouldn't have taken close to a decade to get through the prosecution process. The biggest issue, and we touch on it a little bit in the film, was that was asked to repeat my story over and over and over and over and over again. And it wasn't just one person and one moment of abuse. We're talking about multiple abuse moments with multiple abusers. That process was so it was more traumatizing than the abuse itself. And the problem when you're asking a young child who's already fragile to repeat their story over and over again, you get to the second, third, fourth, fifth time that child's asked to tell a story, they may omit some details because it's too painful to go back there again. So what we had was we had a bunch of different testimonies that were attributed to me. And, you know, sometimes I'd leave out certain details, or I would just stop talking because I was just exhausted. And that hurt, that made for a more challenging prosecution process. With child advocacy centers having a forensic interview, or a forensic interviewer who is trained on a nationally accredited and approved model to conduct that interview in a neutral, non-leading, developmentally appropriate way, and to have that interview recorded, that reduces secondary trauma on so many levels that alone is huge. But then you talk about having a family advocate who can help be a liaison for all of the court details and all of these moving pieces and parts that parents are struggling to understand because they're in the throes of trauma too. We didn't have any of that. So my parents had to basically get a minor in law just to understand what was going on. My mom, you know, she had to quit her job just to manage all of this. And if we had had a child advocacy center, I would have only had to disclose what happened to me once. And my parents would have had more support. I would have had more support. You know, my grandparents sold their home and downsized to help pay for my therapy. That wasn't a service that was provided by the county. And I'm grateful that they were able to do that. I'm grateful that that meant I got Dr. Lustig, but mental health services, a lot of CACs do provide that to the kids that are walking through those doors. So, I mean, it was a chain mail effort from the people in my life, and going above and beyond what was maybe normal or asked of them typically. And because of all those people, I got the support that I needed. But it was messy, it was convoluted, it took way longer than it needed to. And I just think that when we give children the opportunity to come into a building that is designed specifically for them, that is child friendly, that is filled with people who are trained very specifically to deal with children who have experienced trauma, where their energy and disclosure is honored and valued and recorded as forensic evidence, we're giving these kids every opportunity to move forward with their lives in a much more efficient and healthy way. I don't think it should take 10 years for a kid to get justice. I think we need to fix that. And CACs are they're the solution.
Yeah, they certainly are. Sasha, as we are just about close, ready to wind up, first off, I'd like to give a plug for you. For those of you who are listening to the Q&A, Sasha does go and do presentations, speaks at conferences and so forth. And if you've not heard him at one of those, I've been fortunate enough twice to hear that You might want to reach out to him because it will be well worth the time to have him come to your event. So as we get ready to close, first off, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. And we just have kind of one final question we'd like to ask you. And that's, what's next for Sasha Joseph Neulinger?
It's such a great question. I am so excited because the sky's the limit. And actually, it isn't even the limit. I mean, we could go to the stars. I've recognized the power of my voice, and I now have seen that I can connect with a lot of people in that way, both with speaking and with film. And, right now I'm very focused on being present with my wife and my puppy and enjoying the emotional fruits of those labors. But I'm kind of in this manic creative state right now. I've been writing motivational content, speeches, filmic pieces. I've been outlining fictional narrative scripts. There's a couple fictional narrative feature-length film ideas that I'm stewing around with. And documentary is also in play. There's a few concepts I have, but what I know is that I'm not limited to just one thing. If I had to use my energies to survive a crazy experience, but I've built those muscles up. So now I'm excited to be able to use my energies and my creative juices to create film and speeches and content that aren't about child sexual abuse, but are much more focused on where I am today, this beautiful spot that I landed, and how to share that with others. And so whatever story is the big one that I share next with the world, out of this kind of amazing crock pot of creativity, it'll be the one that compels me so much that I can't look away, that I have to tell that story, that I have to communicate it. And so for me right now, it's extremely exciting, but I can tell you this, like, no matter what I do professionally moving forward, what's consistent and next for me on my personal life is having a beautiful, loving, supportive marriage and enjoying that, and eventually building a family, and getting the opportunity to experience life where trauma isn't preventing me from being present and smiling and enjoying all of the blessings and all of the gratitude that come from facing those demons head on. So it's nothing but up from here, and I'm already pretty stoked at where I am.
Well, we certainly will look forward to hearing from you in the future. And again, Sasha, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us and to share all of your thoughts and everything with us. Thank you.
Linda, thank you as well. And to everybody here today, thank you for everything you do to serve and protect the children of the state of New York. They're all incredibly lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.